Artifact Scythe is the talk of the town in the TCG as of late. If you're unaware of what it does, its effect is, you can set this card from your hand to your spell and trap zone as a spell. During your opponent's turn, if this set card in the spell and trap zone is destroyed and sent to your graveyard, special summon it. If this card is special summoned during your opponent's turn, your opponent cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn. This effect is absolutely insane. Locking players out of being able to special summon from the extra deck is an incredibly strong ability, and anytime a similar effect has been printed on such a card, it's always had its time in the limelight. Although seeing only fringe play over the past couple of years as a high-rolly sideboard card alongside Artifact Sanctum, this card as of late has been making waves in the TCG due to its ability to be searched off of Artifact Dagda and destroyed on the following turn by Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. However, what if I were to tell you that secretly, deep down, that Artifact Scythe isn't actually that big of a deal? I know this is a hot take, but please, bear with me. Let's talk about why Artifact Scythe isn't that good. One, you have to deck build extremely poorly. When you look at the decks playing the Scythe lock, you look at them and realize that, holy shit, that's a lot of garnets. Because of recent product releases containing engines with very powerful payoffs, a lot of decks are trying to fit these powerful engines into their decks, and as a result, become a lot less consistent just due to the variant nature of having to play about 4 to even 8 garnets within the main deck. Additionally, these bricks and engine requirements do take up considerable main and extra deck space, leaving little room for either hand traps, engine safety and grind potential, and of course, power cards. The current TCG metagame is very much one that isn't able to be played with just purely engine and combo with no regards for the possibility of losing the dice roll. You have to be playing hand traps and particularly going second cards, and playing a deck that is overall ill-equipped to break a board going second or play hand traps to counteract these powerful engines and build the board strategies is realistically going to fail as a serious meta contender. Ultimately, the overall high garnet count leading to deck inconsistencies as well as the ludicrous space that these engines take up just to produce a Scythe lock already points in these decks in a direction that is less than favorable. Here's a quick quote from YCS winning champion Patrick Hoban and his perspective on decks playing lots of garnets.
Have you noticed the mass influx of garnets that we've seen in recent years? I don't know if you...
Yeah, I think that's a mistake. I have a hard rule, 1 max.
So
it's okay to draw it a little bit, but like if you just start adding multiple, like you're just gonna draw it all the time.
2. It's an overcommitment. You'll notice that decks that have played these engines in the past as a primary game plan never really saw serious competitive play. Why is that? Is it possible that every pro player in the world is unaware of this super sleeper deck and it's only a matter of time before Fluffle is tier 0? Not exactly. The primary reason these decks fail is because without the Scythe lock or some other instant win button, they're ultimately just worse versions of already meta decks, requiring more cards to combo off, are more fragile to stuff such as hand traps and interaction, and ultimately end in weaker boards. These decks are still playable in their own right, but without these powerful auto-win buttons, their end boards, payoffs, and grind game are ultimately much weaker compared to meta decks, where in the case of they're not able to end on extremely powerful auto-win cards, the same way something like Fluffle might be able to end on a Scythe, they are much more able to play through interaction, they are much more easily able to play through hand traps, and of course much more easily able to make powerful end boards without needing to rely on an auto-win card. When you're looking at current Scythe lock decks, you'll notice that overall, these decks without Scythe end on not very threatening boards. What does PK realistically do without Scythe? At best, if all goes right in the world, they can set up an Omni Negate, a Pop, and 2 Fiendish Chains at best. Although that's pretty powerful, that's not exactly a tier 0 meta threat. They've been always able to do something like this, and they still haven't been very prominent. When you look at Dragon Link ending on about 5 to 6 forms of interruption that plays barely any garnets at all, you start to realize the disparity and the need for these rogue decks to try and high roll into these auto win buttons that ultimately people will complain about, but realize that, hey, this is just an auto win button in a deck that kinda sucks. Additionally, when you look at most Scythe building boards, they're especially weak to cards such as Forbidden Droplet or even Chalice if you manage to force the Griffin out or they couldn't end on it, making their entire turn 1 play basically worthless. The only exception to this rule is the based deck, which is able to set up Herald of the Arclight and Baronne de Fleur in order to protect against Droplet and General Negation. Even in slower formats, these decks suffer just because of how inconsistent and weak they were to interruption. Remember, Phantom Knight was still completely legal last format, just without the Brave stuff. Because you're playing so many bricks, you're realistically playing with a 3 to 4 card hand on average, and as a result are much more susceptible to hand traps. Because of how high rolly these decks are, they are forced to play the Brave engine as insulation against cards such as Nibiru, resulting in a very cat and mouse like game of, do I use my Griffin to negate a Veiler on Dagda and risk immediately losing to a Nibiru, or do I let it resolve and end on an extremely subpar board? These are the sort of reasons why going for decks playing the Scythe lock in most decks, whether meta or rogue, not only hurts your deck building and consistency overall, but your end boards and the overall power levels of your deck overall. 3. It's not always an auto win button. Unsurprisingly, there are a lot of decks and cards in this format that are completely able to ignore the Scythe lock. The Brave engine on its own is strong enough to beat the Scythe lock in most scenarios. The Brave engine is able to help players realistically survive the turn and break the board, as well as gain a much more powerful turn 4 versus your opponent's turn 3, since they use so many of their resources on turn 1, forcing them into a much weaker turn 3 board where they're forced to OTK you with a ton of their resources already spent. Not to mention, they do have to do it under a Griffin Rider. Additionally, there do exist tons of cards that do play around the lock. Super Poly is able to break the based board and go into Guilty Gear. Forbidden Droplets immediately wins you the game against any board that only has one Omni that's not named Herald of the Arclight. Forbidden Chalice is incredible for being able to out the entire board if you force the Griffin on the previous turn with, say, a Veiler on Dagda. Eldritch and Fluwandereeze are overall decks that just do not care about the Scythe lock. I know that saying just draw the out is a very cop-outy answer, and I made an entire video about why that isn't really a real argument, but when so many options exist within the main and side deck as options to both play through the lock or stop it entirely, drawing the out becomes a much more realistic argument when you factor in the idea of sideboarding into the equation, where drawing the out in games 2 and 3 over the course of a best of 3 match is much more realistic versus in a best of 1 such as in Master Duel. I want to make it very clear that I do want Scythe banned, and I think the card is very unhealthy for the overall state of the TCG. It is an overall extremely unhealthy card, and Floodgates are ultimately the scourge of Yu-Gi-Oh in my opinion. However, I just wanted to make a video that discusses why a lot of people may have a warped perception of the advanced format right now and believe that Scythe locked fucked their Sword Soul Moye into submission, and bring up a few points for why this package isn't as oppressive or as powerful and as splashable as you originally thought. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Stevie Blunder. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.